Hello, this is Gareth from the iMoot team. It is my superb pleasure to welcome Shane Elliott from Pukunui itself, for without which this conference would not happen. I'd like to thank him for his time, his effort, and for the hours and days and absolutely months he spent putting this presentation together. Away you go, Shane.
Thanks, Gareth. Yeah, so first thing is, yes, Richard, I want a Eurovision badge too. Gareth, we need Eurovision badges. Yeah, so thank you to everybody who's been at iMoot. It's always a great pleasure to run this conference, and you know, it's different every year. So anyway, we'll talk about that in the next session anyway. I'll keep my webcam going. I don't particularly like it, but I'll ignore it. And I'm pretty much unshaven as well. It's been a few days. Let's talk about this session. So it's Moodle security for non-techies. This is not an in-depth session in any way. I'm just going to take one of these out actually. This is not an in-depth session in any way. I'm not an expert in a lot of these areas. This is really just based out of my experience in talking to teachers and admins when we do consults and training. And so quite often we do get asked questions. You know, usually it's someone who's been thrown into being a Moodle administrator. So they've just inherited it, and then they have questions about, is my site secure? And, you know, they'll hear something and they'll ask a question, is this my responsibility? And so on. And so Vinny, this session actually was a filler. There was someone who pulled out from a session late yesterday, or yesterday's sessions. Actually, it was early yesterday. And so I put this together in a real hurry. Did say to Vinny I was available. So I put this together, and he suggested just doing one on security. So that's the background to this. So it's I haven't probably done as much in depth as I want to, but I think it's just a good overview. And I should note, I've used quite a few little images in throughout this. Most of them should be available under Creative Commons, but if they're not, let me know. If you view the recording, you think that's an image you shouldn't be using, let me know. All the use is non-commercial, so I thought I'd put that caveat in now. All right, a little bit about me, because it's all about me. I wear multiple hats, just like we all do. So probably wear hundreds of different hats in your different roles in life. So which kind of make me who I am today, good or bad. So probably the important ones are that I was a student. So I studied, just to give you some background to me, it was just I studied, did a maths, science, IT degree. So then I thought, what do you do with that? So then I did postgraduate, 2 years of postgrad teaching. And then I actually went out and was a teacher for a while. I got over that quite quickly after about 3 years. Really enjoyed the teaching, didn't really enjoy the administration, things that went around it. And really, I'm a developer, nerdy type person. I do that. And which is how I got into Moodle. I actually worked with Martin on some other IT projects actually before Moodle. So in the late 90s, we were working together. And then he started his PhD in Moodle, and I was actually working at the same university as him in a different area. And but he needed some help programming with Moodle as people started using it. So he used to work at his house actually here in Perth, just in a little back room on a small table on the early versions of Moodle. So that was kind of fun days where you could actually do a lot with the code. You could put funny things in there. So some of you will know there's little Easter eggs in Moodle. That was more a result of midnight programming sessions where we thought something would be funny and we just put it in there. It's very hard to do that these days with all the code reviews and things that happen. Anyway, yeah, Women's Lib was one of those very late night ones. So, yeah, I think it will be forever. Every now and then someone who looks at the code wonders what it's there for. yeah, more importantly, I'm a father and a husband. They're probably the main roles I have in my life these days. I did start a PhD, and this leads on to security. I did start a PhD myself in 2000, looking at cross-border security and terrorism. But I thought that would be boring and wouldn't keep my interest for 3 years. So I actually stopped it, which was quite funny because the following year, the whole 9/11 attacks happened. And I look back and think, gee, I could have been an expert being paid to go around the world and tell people to be secure. So, which makes the point, you never know what's going to happen until it happens, which is kind of the whole point of security, is trying to secure things before something bad happens. So let me move on. If I can. Running multiple screens here. So security, what it is, and I thought, well, I don't really have a good definition, so I went to Wikipedia, being the source of all knowledge, as we know it is, and it couldn't possibly be wrong. Which had this definition, which I thought was good. Security is a degree of resistance to or protection from harm. It applies to any vulnerable and valuable asset, such as a person, dwelling, community, nation, or organization. And so there's some important concepts around that. So there's the idea of risk, which is any possible event that might cause loss or harm. There's a threat, which is kind of like putting legs there. It's a method of triggering the risk. There's two outcomes from a threat. So one is that there is a vulnerability. So there's some weakness in a system that can be exploited. And then the exploit is actually putting legs to that as well. So that's one possible path. But if you identify a threat, the path that you really want to go down is that there's countermeasures. You put things in place to stop the threat. And the idea of that is to give assurance to your end users. And that's really the whole point of security, is actually give assurance to people that the system they're using is secure. There won't be any harm, there won't be any loss. And I found that when we do training, quite often people ask me those questions because they want to be assured that Moodle is secure, that the way they're using it is secure, that there's not going to be a loss of information, that people who shouldn't get access to private information won't. And so it's really just assuring them, yeah, your setup is looking good, the settings you have there. Yeah, that's what it's about. So here's the thing about security, and it's a great quote. The most secure system in the world is one that no users can access. Yeah, which would be very secure. No one would get anything they shouldn't because they just couldn't access the system. But I think there's a balance between making a usable system and a secure one, and probably not even a balance. I actually think you could have both. You can have a usable system and a secure one. So yeah, and I've got this comment in my notes. It does make me quite sad when you have a dedicated IT person who is in complete control of a Moodle site or any LMS, because they will lock it down. Now, I understand, being an IT person, I understand their perspective, and absolutely you need that perspective of someone securing it. But then you also need a site that's usable. And so quite often I find that teachers or educators get quite frustrated when it is the IT person who is controlling the Moodle site, and they need to ask them for permission to enable certain features throughout the Moodle site. I think your ideal scenario is when you have both working together. You have the educators who know what they need in a Moodle site, and you have the IT people who you can talk to about securing it and what vulnerabilities there are. And both are really experts in their field, and they should work it out. Yeah, and sometimes they'll lock down other things, which may affect your usage of a site too. So it's really just working with them to find out what you need and whether they can make that happen. I think one of the best conversations I've ever been a part of was I was involved in a presentation at Hong Kong University many years ago with Dom, who works in our office here in Perth. we were up there, and it was very much a last-minute thing. They got us in. They were looking at different LMSs, and they wanted to know about Moodle. So we were in this room, and we basically had the Vice-Chancellor, head of e-learning, well, the new head of e-learning. We had several IT staff, including the head of their IT. And and we're in this room for about an hour, and they really grilled us with some tough questions, which was good. We answered them as much as we could. And but I remember at the end of it, the head of IT, he stood up and he just said to the room, he said, "Look," he goes, "We're satisfied. Our questions have been answered. We think that we can support this system." He goes, "But it's really up to you, the educators, whether you want to use it, how you want to use it, and we'll support you in doing that." And I thought that was actually that was the IT staff working with the educators at university, you know, and yeah, they got their questions answered. They felt they could support it and secure it as they needed to, but it's really up to the educators how they want to use it, if they wanted to use it. So yeah, that's right, Josh. I thought it was a great view of how these two different departments could work together. It was really good. Head of IT since left the university. He's now working in Melbourne, I think. So. So let me move on. So as I said, this presentation is very non-techie. I can get technical, but I've deliberately kind of kept it from being technical talks, and it's really brief overview. And really, I've just got it down to 4 areas looking at Moodle, at security around setting up a Moodle site. So looking at the hardware, the server software, the Moodle code, and the other one, Moodle settings, which is probably very important. And really brief notes. So this is more of a discussion. So if you have questions, throw them in. Absolutely happy to try and answer them, or other people can probably answer them. There's quite a few names in here, and I know some of you are very much experts. Absolutely. People choose Moodle based on all sorts of things. Actually, it's quite funny how they do that. Just as an aside, we quite often, so we're a Moodle partner company, Pukunui, and so quite often we get people who ring us up and they say, we want to use Moodle. We've heard it's really good for whatever, from someone, but would like it to, we've used systems in the past and we'd like it to do A, B, and C. And we go, you've just described Blackboard to us. Why don't you use Blackboard? Or some other system. Use the tool for the job. If that's the features you want, then you really should go for that system. Moodle has its strengths, and other systems have their strengths. So it's working out what tool fits your organization. So I'm usually not upset when people do use Blackboard. I just think if that's the best fit, then it saves a load of frustration, actually, trying to make Moodle work like Blackboard. I'm just using that as an example. Yeah, sure, Gareth, and that might be the answer too. All right, so moving on to all of these. I've got a few XKCD cartoons in here just because I like XKCD. So talking about the hardware, so what a server is, and I'm doing this very non-techie. A server basically is just a computer that delivers something. There we go. So any computer could act as a server, really. So it could be your laptop, could be your desktop. Hopefully it's not that old Mac sitting in the middle. It was very good in its day, but probably past that. Ideally, most of you would probably be hosted in data centers or have one set up if you're in a large organization locally. So probably that top right photo is something like you've got your website will be hosted on something that looks like that physically. Yeah, there's all sorts of different servers you can have out there, and so you can run your laptop as a server as well. So I have Moodle running on my oh yeah, the tape drives. I remember so this is me aging a bit, but my uncle was involved in setting up the computer systems at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and then he inherited all their old computers. And so I remember going to his office and he goes, "Do you want to play a game?" I said, "Sure." And old terminal games, and the whole load of punch cards. Yeah, exactly, Gareth. It was just funny. Here's your game. And it was this big pile of punch cards, put them in, and we loaded it up. And yeah, I think it was an early Star Trek game, actually. You had to warp around the galaxy. It's all text-based, though. It was fun times, though. Yeah. It was before my time, too. It was just my uncle, just had access to computers. So it was great for me to learn. He used to test out operating systems on me as well. So. Oh, Richard. Yeah, Jinx. Me too. That was my first one, the ZX81. Whether it's expanded 8K memory or was it 16K? So it was, yeah, Commodore 64s. 8K, because who would ever use that much? Oh, maybe we should do a glossary, just people's first computers. Oh, wow, Bob. Awesome. Richard, I remember that flight simulator. ZX81s. Moving on. So just, if I can get the slide going. So basically, it's just questions around this. And really, this was me just putting questions there that people have asked. Probably things to think about. Who's responsible? So ideally, talking about responsibility first, if you are someone who's been thrown into being an administrator of a Moodle site, really the server hardware is something that it's going to be your IT department if you host it in-house. They're the ones that should be securing that part of it. Or a data center, could be your internet service provider, or could be some cheap web hosting provider. Whoever's providing that service, it has to look after the hardware as well. Or it could be a Moodle services partner like ourselves. And to be honest with you, we actually then partner with Amazon. So we use their cloud services. We have control over those instances and we set them up. The actual physical hardware is controlled by Amazon. So there's some really important questions around that. One, who has access to the servers? Who can actually physically get to the server and touch it and break it? And maybe someone can put in a flash drive and load up extra software. So they're good questions to ask. We've recently had to go through an audit to some extent. One of our clients had to get one of those ISO, some number. I think Stuart looked at it yesterday. It's 27001 or something like that, which is a security computery type audit on your systems. Because we provided their Moodle site, we had to go through part of the audit process, and we passed it all. A whole lot of questionnaires. And part of that also then was saying that we do partner with Amazon, what services they provide, what security they provide. So it was good to know, actually, we got through that process. So there is a risk there. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Richard. I think that's the one. Yeah. What happens when a component fails? There's questions about that too. So, your system may be set up, this is getting a bit techy, is, you might have hardware firewalls. So what happens when that component fails? Is it just suddenly open up to anyone accessing it, or does it actually shut down? Or, there's questions to ask about the actual hardware itself. And as I said, usually this is what IT people are for. That's their job. So wherever it's hosted, that's what they should be looking at and monitoring those systems. Yes, so that's that one. Moving on, so the next one I have, it's just about the server software. This covers the areas. So when you set up a server, all computers basically have an operating system, something that runs. So it could be Windows, could be a Mac OS, could be Android, iOS on the Apples. Most of the servers around the world that do web server stuff are Linux-based servers, so Unix operating systems and so on. And then on top of that, there is basically other software depending on the type of server. So web server software, database server. There's a whole lot of other ones. They're the applicable ones to Moodle sites. So essentially, you've got your hardware. On top of that, all the server software. And and there's all sorts of varieties of those. So web servers, Apache is probably the most popular one in the world. Definitely the most popular web server software in the world. But there's other ones out there. IIS, Nginx is getting quite popular as well. And database servers, most of you will at least have heard of them, MySQL and Postgres, and all of these ones. And so it's just, again, it's about understanding that software sits there, and then I guess asking the pertinent questions about that. So that you move on. Talking about responsibility, again, this is really the same as the IT department. Usually the people who manage your hardware will also manage the server software. The IT department, data center if you're hosted there, the ISP, again, your Moodle services partner. In our case, we actually manage the server software ourselves. So while we don't deal with the hardware, we do deal with the server software. So that's the level where, I should flick that for you. That's the level where we deal with our service. So from the server software onwards, we manage that. Yeah. So I made the comment, if you really do look at the internet, just extend that out, the internet itself is based on all sorts of little pieces of patch software, and it's quite scary, some of it, how these systems work. It just runs, but just understanding the operating systems and all the things that are needed to make our web work is, yeah. All right. So that's server software. So questions, what sort of user environment are you in? Understanding that depending on where you're hosted, you may be on a shared server. That just means that there's multiple tenants that are using the same physical hardware and server software. So we do run some servers like that. We run some that are dedicated for clients. We do a mixture. But understanding then, there's implications about those environments. We lock it down. So one user on our servers, one tenant cannot access anything from another one. So they're very much compartmentalized. They can't access that. You'd really want to make sure that happens. Even understanding that if you're in a cloud environment, that's underneath the physical hardware is shared. So while the software that sits on top of that will still compartmentalize you, it's also understanding that your physical resources are shared. So if you get someone who is really hammering those physical resources, it may affect you because there's limited resources. So again, we've had that happen on our servers where they're being shared instances as well. We've had one client who suddenly decided, there's 300 or 400 students that need to do one quiz at the same time. So the concurrent usage just climbed through the roof. And so what it did actually affected other people who were using that server, which leads on to that DDoS attack. Also understanding, was the server set up as a server? It's probably a very good question. And if you are someone who doesn't understand servers and you've tried to set one up, please don't use those download packages you can get from Moodle.org, where you set up, you get Windows installer packages and Mac installer packages. They are great for just playing around with Moodle. They're really bad at setting up servers because they're quite insecure. And I have several versions of Moodle running on my little Mac laptop here. Yeah, absolutely, Melanie. We actually tell our clients to warn us if they think there's going to happen, and then we just throw more resources at it. So that's how we deal with it. Yeah, so if you can give us a warning, we kind of deal with it. Hopefully, your people can do that too. Yeah, so make sure your server's being set up as a server. So there's a big difference between those installer packages and getting your own server software. Those installer packages are basically what I was talking about before, the web server, the database server, and then Moodle sits on top of that. And so they're providing a whole package for you to run on your local computer. But they are very insecure, and they're not tuned very well for a large usage either. So it's just questions to ask. What type of system are you using? Just understanding that. Are you in a Windows server? Are you on a LAMP stack, which stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, in the language Moodle is written in. Each of those has its strengths and weaknesses. So it's just asking questions. And if you're a Moodle administrator, I shouldn't say just, but if you're the Moodle administrator, you're not IT expert, it's really, I guess, being aware of that. Ask your IT staff, what are we on? And are you guys expert in it? Have you actually hardened the system? is it secure? So asking them the questions about whether they're aware of the system, they have expertise in using it. And a lot of our work, actually, we get quite a lot of consulting work where we've been asked to come in and set up servers. We've done it recently for a government department here in Australia. Their IT staff had no expertise in Linux systems, but there was a decision made that Moodle should be running on that. So we basically have come in and set up the servers for them. They did try and they made a mess of it. So we basically come in and sort them out for them. So it's just getting the expertise and being able to support that ongoing as well. And the last point about that too is just in terms of security, update the software. So if your IT staff, make sure your software is up to date. Nothing beats that. There's always little things that need to get patched. We have all sorts of scripts that auto patch our software to a certain degree. So we have that running every night, actually. Little patches get made to our server software. So that Heartbleed, as an example, that Heartbleed security bug came out, it's probably a year ago now. Our servers actually all patched themselves overnight. So before I even got the little message the next morning that there was, the announcement of this little bug, by the time I got into our servers to check, the patches had already been applied. So it was good from that perspective. Our last question there, someone asked this in the previous session I ran. It doesn't protect you from dedicated attacks, so your server software. So DDoS is a dedicated denial of service attack. And so for those who don't know, it's a very popular attack that happens on the web. Essentially what people do, they take control of several computers, and what they do is they make requests to your web server. Your web server is sitting here, and they come and they make all these requests from somewhere else. It's like a user, but they're making a lot of requests, several a second. And then they get another computer that's also doing, and another computer. And so you can get thousands of computers all making multiple requests all at the same time on this one web server that sits in the middle. And what happens is the server doesn't have the resources to handle those requests, and it basically just slows down until it's unusable. And so you have your real users trying to access the server, and they just can't because it's really just not responding. So that's what a denial of service attack is. They happen, you hear about them on the news every now and then. They happen to big sites. And there's ways you can set up hardware to get around that. So putting in load balancers and so on, which gets to a certain level. You can do content delivery networks, which is about, so Amazon provide this, it's called CloudFront. There's other ones out there as well. So your content's delivered from all sorts of different IP addresses that are going out, so dynamic IPs. That will go some way towards it. That doesn't help a lot in Moodle because Moodle has a lot of dynamic data in it. So you can also, there's server software you can set up. We have active firewalls, so they look to see if there's a lot of requests coming in from a single IP address, and we'll block that IP address for a certain period of time. But even that only goes some way towards protecting you. At the end of the day, if someone really wants to do one of these attacks, they'll, at the very least, they'll succeed for a short period of time. So you can go some way to protecting yourself. Again, if there's any questions about this, just chuck them in the chat. And there's enough experts in here to actually answer that, probably without me saying anything. So moving on. Moodle Code. Here we go. So, right, talking about the Moodle Code. So just understanding how Moodle is set up. So there is Moodle itself, sitting on top of the server software, is made up of three pieces. There's the code, there's the Moodle data directory, so that's where the files are stored. So if you upload a PDF into Moodle, they get stored there. And there's the database that sits on the side, which is all your settings, various things, configuration of Moodle. So I mean, if you're backing up your site, there's actually those pieces in red in that diagram, the things you really do need to back up. The code you can always download again. But understanding that code part is the core Moodle code, but also includes any additional plugins you might have in there. So I've got a few comments around this. Yeah, Joshua, that is one of my favorite XKCD cartoons, actually. And I put it in this place. It's really to make I really want to make the point, the Moodle code, and this is to give you assurance. So if you're wondering about the Moodle code and how secure it is, there is a lot of the work that happens behind the scenes is about securing the code. It's actually about making sure nasty things that happen in this cartoon don't happen to you. So specifically, that cartoon's about sanitizing data. See, that basically means when you enter some information into a form, into a web form, it gets submitted to the server, and quite often that then gets written to the database or checked against the database. And if the data is not sanitized, people can actually do nasty things. They could delete all your data. So assuring you, if you didn't know, all the Moodle forms, the standard ones in the core code at least, go through all these APIs, so the programmers have to use them, and it sanitizes the data. It makes sure that these things cannot happen. So just letting you know, that's just to keep you happy. Yeah, I've got a few notes here. So a few things to understand about this is understanding the version numbers in Moodle. So if you're a Moodle administrator, you really should be on top of what the version numbers, how they're numbered. So basically, the major versions are things like 2.7, 2.8, 2.9, 3.0 come out later this year. And understanding that those versions come out every 6 months. For every version, there's 12 months worth of like support in terms of patches to the code, bug fixes, and so on. And there's 18 months worth of support for security patches. So if you do those numbers, you'll probably realize your last supported version now is 2.6. Is that right, for security patches? 2.7 for security patches. So if you're on a version earlier than that, that might be a good impetus to update your site, keep the code updated. And given the versions come out every 6 months, they're not major things. They're quite good. Yeah. Now, they do realize that some people don't have that luxury of updating every year, essentially, is what you need to do. So there are some long-term support releases. So 2.7 has 3 years worth of support for its security patches. And I think the plan is for 3.0 is to make that a long-term support as well. So there are some versions that have a much longer support. The way to find that out, so look at the release notes, which are in the Moodle docs. If someone, Gareth, if you could chuck that in the chat, the link to that, or if someone can find it. Yeah, I've got an example. I wrote down. There's an example. I was training someone about 2 weeks ago in Melbourne, and from Australian Defence Force, and their system, they said they were on Moodle 2.2 or 2.3, and they said the problem was any new software that goes on their systems, it has to go through review, and they have to look at every line of code to make sure it's secure, which I then found quite funny, that they're running quite an insecure system for the reason of security. Yeah, they couldn't update to more secure code. So, because in that time, since that Moodle version of Moodle they're on, there were some security patches that were made. So it's quite a bizarre situation. And I understand where they're coming from as well. So they're on very, tight systems. So they do want to look at any code that goes on there. They might need to find another way to manage their Moodle site. Third-party plugins. If you do add extra plugins to your site, you might want to just get some information about them, make sure they are secure. So what I mean, so the plugins that go to the Moodle plugins database, they do go through some checks. So basically check that they do what they say they do, they will install. You can do usability, users can do reviews on it, so they can review it and tell you what it's like. So it's worth reading those. However, the checks are getting better and harder. So just because a plugin's there though, and it does what it says it does, doesn't mean the code itself is secure. It doesn't mean it's giving out information from your site to another one. Doesn't mean it even runs well either. Actually, it might work well with one user testing it, but may fall apart when there's a high level of concurrent usage. So my suggestions around that is really just do your homework. Exactly, Joshua, I was about to say that. see who's developing it. So if you know the developer, if they're a core developer, you're pretty much okay. Basically, if you see a plugin by Tim Hunt, as an example, you'd be fine with it. It's all the OU plugins. Just go with it. And a lot of these guys are in here too. Joshua, a few others that are in here as well. So just knowing the names of the developers, and you get to know them. And if you don't know, just ask. Moodle.org is a great community. You can always just ask. People will give you feedback. The stability as well. So seeing how stable the code is, whether it gets upgraded recently, regularly as well. Just trying to think. Someone did a great presentation on that, knowing which plugins to install and what to look for. All right. Our process, just to let you know, so again, this is a process that we go through that might help you, is so if any of our clients ask for a plugin, we basically go through this. We, yes, where was Anthony? Thank you, Joshua. The Borg, yeah. That's what we call it. We call Blackboard Black Borg, because we think they're assimilating all the other companies around. Little in-house LMS joke there. With plugins, we go through this process. Someone asks for a plugin. We want this installed on our site. We look at it. If we know it, or we know the developers, we say, yep, sure, we'll just install it. So there's a lot of plugins we already know about. If we don't know it, we'll do a review of it, and we'll come back with one of 3 possible scenarios. One is, yeah, it looks great, we'll install it. Second one is, no, we won't install it as it is, but it needs some update on the code, and we can do that. Some small updates just to secure it. The third option is basically we say, no, we're not going to touch this, and we refuse to have it on our servers because it will open up security holes. Basically, it needs a big rewrite. Very rare, however, that we ever say that. I can't even think of an instance where we've done that. We've absolutely refused to do something. So that's our process. That helps. So Moodle Code. So yeah, there is a lot of things in that. Sorry, I've got a questions page here. So just asking questions, what version you're on, just being aware of that, keeping up to date. Is your site registered? Absolutely. You should be registering your site. So if you are the site administrator, it's worth hitting that little registration link. It's the second one in the site administration. The reason is, well, 2 reasons. One is if you don't make it private, your registration, you get a link at moodle.org, and that's just really good Google juice because you'll get linked from Moodle, which is quite high in the Google rankings, so it will bump your rankings up as well. So if you're a site that's trying to sell your services and get your rankings bumped up, that will work. You may not want a Google ranking. The second reason is that it will add you to a mailing list as the administrator. So you get some notifications about any new versions coming out or security patches that need to be made on your site. That is really low volume. Maybe an email every 2 or so months. Basically, there's a policy of responsible disclosure when there's a security patch. So if someone reports a security bug in Moodle, it gets put into a security section at the tracker, so only the security team can look at that. They will make a patch as fast as they can if it's a major one. And then what they do, basically they make an announcement to the Moodle partners. Then they make an announcement to the registered, so if you're on that mailing list, you'll get an announcement, and then they make a public announcement about that security patch. And they're usually, depending on what it is, sometimes it's about a day apart, sometimes it might just be an hour apart, 2 hours apart. So it really does depend on what it is. And basically for the partners, because they know that we host a lot of sites, it gives us a chance to just get ahead of the game and patch all the sites if we need to make those patches. And now someone asked the question the other day, do you need to take notice of those security things? Do we have to apply every patch? My take on it is these days, because there are so many reviews on code, it's actually very hard for a developer to accidentally put a regression into the Moodle code. It's very hard to introduce a security bug in the code. A general one is what I'm talking about. So, and this is, I'm providing this more as an assurance to you as a Moodle administrator about the coding practices. a couple of times I've gone and changed one of the little language strings. One of the words has been out, or there's been something missing. So really, it's nothing major. I've just changed the wording on something. But to make that one-line code change, there's been at least 2 other people have had to review my code. So I've made it. Someone else has done a peer review on it, and then it has to go through an integrator as well. So there's a lot of people looking at all the changes in the code that go on. As I said, early days when we were working at Martin's house, it was very easy. You just put something in there and that was it. We were in control of the code. Actually, I did break Moodle once doing that. For about 24 hours, I broke anyone who downloaded, updated their sites, would have broken it. Martin wasn't happy. So we fixed it though. And thankfully that won't, those were the days of freedom and much danger. So thankfully that would not happen these days. It just could not happen. So in terms of the security patches that come out these days, usually they apply to very specific circumstances. So, there's been a few recently, but it's kind of, if you have this authentication method turned on, like LDAP or something, and you're running with these settings, then the security bug will apply to you. So it's worth reading the security patches, but, quite often they won't apply to you. You don't need to rush to make that patch. You can wait for the next version to come out. And get all those patches made. So, and thanks, Gareth. Probably not. So you can, I think it's worth reading those security announcements, working out whether they apply to you. If they do, make the patch. Essentially go with those. There's always changes happening to the code, so you can always do minor upgrades anyway. So every week there's a new release of the code that comes out. So we do that to our hosted clients. We actually try and do it every 28 days. We update their sites, as in the minor versions, so 2.9.1, and there's always changes happening there. We actually do that underneath live sites. We don't even tell them. We just do it because there's very minor things that get changed. We won't do it to major versions. It's on request. So that was it. Who has access to the code? So who can actually change that code? Usually it's your IT staff. But you can install plugins via the Moodle interface now. There's some setup required on the server to make that happen. But if that's the case, then realizing all admins can actually install extra plugins just on the fly. So which you might want to keep in check, especially if you don't trust the other administrators. I trust you who are listening to this, but it's the other administrators that might be the problem. Who has access to the code? Because you can create serious problems with that as well. When was it last updated, as I said? So just keeping your code up to date. What additional plugins are installed? Someone did ask the question the other day also about SSL. No. I don't believe it, Mel. Should you use SSL? So for those who don't know what SSL is, it's you go to websites and you'll see up the top it says HTTPS, and usually most browsers show as a little green padlock up in the top left. And what that means is, to explain for the complete non-techies, if your site is running under an SSL, a certificate, it encrypts all the information between your browser and the end server. So try and get on screen. The two pieces, the browser talking to the end server, the communication is encrypted between the two. And so that means that if anyone is listening somewhere along that whole network path, if they're trying to get your information out, so the NSA are spying on you, it means they can't. Basically, it's encrypted information. It's all gobbledygook. Gareth, I've actually done that. Put display none. Yeah. Actually, these days with HTML5, you can do things like flip it upside down as well. You can do rotations, just rotate the screen, which is quite handy. Put in the custom CSS. So we targeted some people's courses using that. So that's what SSL is. The reason you may want to use SSL on your site is the scenario is you might have users who go in and use free Wi-Fi at, for example, at McDonald's, go in, use their laptop, sit there, and they're doing their work on their Moodle site. However, on those open networks, anyone else who's on the network can also see the information that you are transmitting. And you get plugins for your browser to this. You can go sit in a cafe and see what other people in that cafe are actually typing in and doing. So it's quite scary. So if you're not using SSL, it's basically all the information's plain text. They can see it. So if you're logging into your site on one of those networks, someone can see the username and password. It gets passed back up to the server. And there's other vulnerabilities, even stuff within Moodle. That maybe you don't want people to see the information you're putting in there. So that's the reason for using SSL. Just stops. Well, the plugins, Trish, it is scary, but the plugins are so easy to get for your browsers that do that. Sometimes just, yeah, you're bored, you can do it. So that's a reason for using SSL anyway. It does take a slight performance hit on the server. Because the server itself has to decrypt any information that comes from your browser and also has to encrypt the reply that gets put back. I think Stuart wrote in the chat the other day, he's seen some research or done some tests on it, and he said it's about 3 to 5% performance hit on the server itself. The server software, so now as you're talking about Apache software as the web server, it's the software that deals with that. Look, it's written really well. They're designed to deal with these things, to do the encryption and decryption. And basically, I think most hosts these days just assume that that's going to happen. You basically allocate resources for that anyway. So we basically encourage our clients to use SSL if they can. Most don't still. In fact, the iMoot site, we're not using SSL. We probably should be, but we're not. Yeah, but most servers would be fine with that extra load. So, so the responsibility for the Moodle code, and maybe your IT department, for the people who have access to code. As I said, site administrators, because you may have access by installing plugins, that interface, or it might be your Moodle services partner. So they're the people managing all that code for you. And so, again, our example is that we let our clients know. So we obviously update their code for them so we have access to it. So they're aware of that. They trust us, I hope. Yeah. We also let our clients have access to the code if they want it as well, although we have some policies around that in terms of our support. All right. Moving on. Actually, Trish, just to make a comment there, you're talking about people having time to do this stuff. Talking about server software, I would estimate that's the point in our whole system setup out of all these levels. That's the point where we get the most attacks. I would say every day there's 3 to 4 dedicated attacks per IP address on our servers. And most of those, we just call them script kiddies. Basically, the people who are bored, they found a script on the web that they can just run that will try and attack a server and find a hole in it. I used to be, I used to look at that and report them back to their ISP. I just can't be bothered these days. There's so many attacks. Our servers have held up, which is why you should keep your server software updated. Most of the time, it really doesn't affect the server running itself. Every now and then, it does degrade the performance. As I said, we have other things in place to try and deal with that. But yeah, no, there are certainly a lot of bored people out there who just download scripts and try and attack servers and so on. And really, it just makes a nightmare experience for everyone else. Really, doesn't do much else than that. The other thing so in terms of our security, is we used to, it's other software. So we're geared up for Moodle, and we're experts in that. But we've actually found a lot of WordPress sites. We had clients who were installing WordPress sites on our servers as well, but not knowing how to secure that. And quite often, the way they'd set it up, it let anyone upload scripts into the web space. So suddenly our servers became like spam servers where they were sending out spam because of those scripts, and which created an ongoing problem of our IP addresses then got blacklisted. So then it affected everyone else who, if it was on a shared IP address, it affected everyone else. So we basically ban WordPress sites on our servers now, unless you can prove that you have some expertise in it and can secure it. So just experiences I'm sharing. There's probably a lot of other things around that as well. Moves me on to Moodle settings. So I've just taken a screenshot there of the security report. Let me say this. The Moodle default settings are pretty secure. So there's all sorts of things you can do to a site to make it insecure, but the default settings are quite secure in terms of the Moodle internal settings. So as an example, you could actually go and set up a role that is quite insecure and then sign that to people as well, which would give them information about other users on the site and so on. But the way the roles are set up by default, absolutely fine. They do what you expect them to do, as that example. This security report, yep, yes, I agree, Joshua. Yeah, the forum emails can be recognised as spam. I think I've got that in my notes to talk about. Yeah, so this security report, I've just taken this is a snapshot, screenshot of one of our sites from a 2.7 site, 2.8 site. It's just a good report to run on your site. I think that's probably the first place to go to if you're not worried about security in your site. Basically, you get one of three warnings. So you get OK, green, you get a warning level, and then you get a danger, Will Robinson type warning in there. So and a lot of those things in there. So in that screenshot, you can see we've got a writable config.php. On our servers, that's not an issue because every user is compartmentalized anyway, so it's not so much of an issue. And because we're managing the code, I could change that to make it a green one, but it really doesn't affect our servers, our users. So you can click on those as well to go to the different settings on your site. Yeah, Moodle settings. So I'll come back to that cartoon, actually. It makes a point about passwords. Just moving on, though. So questions around that. So let me jump back down to that last question because Joshua brought up email settings. There are some settings in there about how Moodle deals with email. We don't have time to go through all the different settings, but you can be seen as a spam site, especially if you're a very active site. So you'll want to work that out, and usually you work that out with your IT staff. They may have set up SMTP servers. If you know about that, that's great. They'll give you the settings for that, and there's an area in Moodle you can put that in. One of the issues, a very specific issue we came across was we host a Moodle site for a government department here in Western Australia, and it sits on our servers. But all their other servers are in their internal network. But what happens from the Moodle site, the emails are generated from their department email addresses, their government email addresses. And so when those emails were coming back into their internal system where they were trying to read them, what was happening was their firewall was saying, well, no, emails shouldn't be generated from this email address outside of our internal network, and they were just blocking them. So what we actually, initially, then we put all the emails to our own SMTP server and just change the outgoing email address, which you can do in Moodle now as well. Force everything from the no reply address. But in the end, we actually that didn't help them knowing who it was from. So they actually changed their firewall settings at their end that got around the problem. So there's quite a few things about email. Certainly a lot of times our IP addresses for various reasons have been blacklisted on sites. So people changing settings they didn't know about. Yeah, and I agree, Joshua, that no reply address made things a lot easier. So that's actually our workaround these days. That's kind of our default place to go now. For those who don't know, there's a no reply address. It's under site administration, plugins, message outputs, email. I believe I remember that. So if you go to that area, it's just about how emails get sent out, and you can put in a no reply address. That address is for anyone who says, I want to hide my email address. So if they make a forum post, it will be sent out from the no reply address rather than their own email address. However, there's also an additional setting, and it came in about 2 versions ago, if I remember right, 2.7, where you can say force all the emails from the site to come from the no reply address. So Moodle.org, I think, works that way, if I remember correctly. All the emails that come out of it are actually from one email address. Yeah. So that solves a lot of problems, and usually that no reply address is actually a physical server address as well. So yeah, Gareth's giving me the hurry up. So yeah, let me move on to this. Other things in there. Well, got quite a few to mention here. What type of users will access your site? It's just understanding your site setup. So do you have user? Are you controlling the users, in other words, or are you expecting people to sign up? So if you're controlling the users, then there's no reason to have that sign up page. That's what I'm saying. And you may even force users to log in. So the first thing you ever see on your site is actually the login page. So I guess it's just understanding your particular organization's setup of your Moodle site and then putting settings around that. Running security report. Capture elements, quite important. So if you are letting users sign up on your site, put a capture element on there. It's in the authentication settings. Capture elements, for that know, is that human readable text that is never readable. So it's usually a graphic. Moodle uses reCAPTCHA, which is Google own that project now. It's a very smart project when you look at it, digitizing content. The reason you do that, we had a client site. It was a government department in Victoria in Australia. They were letting users sign up. They had to, they still do, but they didn't have the capture element, and someone wrote a script that then went and created a whole lot of accounts, and so they just kept submitting that form and creating multiple accounts. And I think it was several 100,000 new user accounts was on their system before we managed to take a hold of it. And putting that capture element would have solved it. Yeah, that's exactly right, Joshua. Yeah. Although understanding reCAPTCHA, quite often they give you two pieces of text. It's understanding you only need to put in one. Google only knows what one of them is. The other one is actually you doing the work for them, digitizing content. So, although I've seen recently there's a lot of numbers. I think they're digitizing the street numbers from the Google Street View. Anyway. Open to Google, there is a setting in your Moodle sites, open to Google, so Google can come and look at what's in your site and do that. Google can only get in where guests can get in anyway. I'd suggest most sites you want that turned off. Actually, doesn't really make sense for most sites. A place like Moodle.org it does, but most sites no. Other comments I've got in here. Does your site connect to other systems? Understanding your Moodle site is part of a whole ecology of systems as well. So if your users are coming in from another system, asking the questions, if there's a vulnerability on the other site, will that affect your Moodle site? And likewise, Moodle can push information out to other systems as well. So does a vulnerability on the Moodle site affect the other one as well? So understanding how these systems work together. And that's probably a question more for the developers or the people who are integrating their systems. But I guess being aware of that as an administrator of a site, just understanding where Moodle's place is amongst all these other systems in your organization. Again, worth asking questions about it, having an idea in your head and then asking the appropriate people, have you actually thought about this? And there's a whole lot of other questions around that, probably we've got time to look at. Now, passwords, this was my final point here. I'll go back to the other slide. My take on Moodle security in terms of Moodle settings, I think on our sites, it's usually the password of the administrator has been the biggest hole we've had to deal with, where they haven't chosen a very smart password. So like a password that is password, or password 123, or that's usually the biggest hole we find. So Moodle does have a password policy in it now, which again can be frustrating as well, but it's there for a reason. Behind the scenes, just to let you know what Moodle does with passwords, it doesn't store them in plain text in the database. It actually hashes them, which is, in non-techie terms, it means it goes through this function and basically put in this text and you get this random text out the end. However, with a hash, it's like a one-to-one relationship. So for every piece of plain text, there's a unique hash. It's very hard to get a clash in these hashes. And Moodle stores the hash. So what happens when you put your password into a Moodle site, it actually hashes that password and compares the hashes together to see if you put in the right password. And the reason for that is Moodle stores the hash in the database. If someone gets access to that database, or in a course backup, if you're backing up user data, the hashes will be in there as well. There is, you can see the hashes. And so there's sites you can go to that will do brute force attacks on hashes to see what the plain text is. Really what they're doing is just looking at dictionary words and trying to work out the hashes. And so Moodle also salts the passwords. It adds random text before the password you enter and then hashes it and stores that. So There's a lot of work happening behind the scenes to make sure that your passwords are secure. That cartoon makes a very good point, though, that computer power these days has increased so much. So I love that little comment underneath. Through 20 years of effort, we've successfully trained everyone to use passwords that are hard for humans to remember but easy for computers to guess. He makes the point that you could get 4 just standard English words, dictionary words, put them together, and it actually is quite hard. Take that with a grain of salt, though, because there are some very good algorithms out there that concatenate dictionary words. But that doesn't, it's just remembering that. So passwords is a big area. I think the password policy in general does help, and the fact that Moodle salts passwords actually really does help it as well. You don't need to really worry about it. It happens behind the scenes. So let me move on. So any questions? That was me. And as I said, I was presenting this more as a general overview. I haven't really gone in depth in any particular areas. I guess it's just trying to give you some assurance of that Moodle Code is quite secure, and then for the other areas of the whole Moodle system, who should really be responsible for those areas? So if you are the Moodle administrator, understanding the server software and the hardware, really you're talking to IT staff about that. It's not your concern, but you really should be asking them, have you secured the systems? Are you on top of updates and so on? And understanding your role is really about the Moodle settings itself. Getting in, and really, I really think that security report is probably the best place to start. If you get any red flags on that, then deal with them basically. So that's on all Moodle sites. So I don't know if there's any questions. We run out of time for all the other things. Or has anyone had any experiences where it's been a horrible security experience? Trish, I think that is actually perfectly fine. I think ask questions, ask people. If you don't know, just ask. It's why not? At Moodle.org is a really friendly community. If there's anyone that hasn't got involved there, it really is friendly, and there's people very much willing to help you out. Everyone had to start somewhere, so everyone's aware of that as well. So and ask in these forums as well. There's a forum on this. If I haven't answered a question you have, you can always ask in there as well. Thankfully no horrible experiences. So, the great quote I remember is that you can learn in 2 ways. You can learn from the pain of your own experiences, or you can learn from the pain of other people's experiences. If you can learn from someone else's experiences, that's probably the ideal way to do it, rather than going through the pain yourself. Oh, awesome, Ollie. Well, there is an algorithm for the particularly helpful Moodlers, so you go into the group, it explains how that's, so obviously some people have rated some of your replies as helpful, so that's good. I'm not as active on Moodle.org as I should be, but I actually, for many years, I used to commit code under Martin's username and used to use his login at Moodle.org, so I'm a bit bummed that my ID number at Moodle.org is it's much higher than what it should have been. And all my early code, I don't really have any, I have my name attached to it, so it wasn't until years later I thought, I really should get my own. As the other developers came on board, we decided to do it. Women's Lib will be under Martin's name, without a doubt. If you use Git, you can use Git blame, I think, to look at, I can just do a log report on it anyway. The old days, though, we used to use CVS, so all that's been ported over to Git. So Trish, just reading your comment, absolutely, nothing beats having good IT staff you can work with. If you can work together, it's a great combination. So, absolute pleasure. Cool. All right. There's no more questions. Comments.
Thanks, Shane. Whoops. Thanks, Shane. It's Gareth. Brilliant. Wow. A lot of interesting stuff. Thank you very much. On behalf of the team there, thank you. Oh, yeah.
On behalf of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, and if there's any other questions you want to ask, and if you want to answer any other questions in there, there's the forum for this course as well. I think there's only one question there, which I'm halfway through answering right now, actually. And a reminder to everyone, the wrap-up session's about to happen next. If you can hang around for the next hour or so, hour and a half, join us in the wrap-up session. We talk about iMoot and what's happening there.